Volume 7 C39. The bed warmers arrived at the room not long after, and Brain kept his face carefully neutral when they passed through the doorway. They came in dressed in a most peculiar fashion. Which is to say they were wrapped from head to toe in muslin cloth. It wasn't see-through, but it was easily the strangest garb Brain had ever seen. "Why are you dressed like that?" Layali asked, and Brain immediately looked back at her and saw that, to his relief, she had her hood up to hide her ears. She had clearly done the same, and the child's question clearly was one she wanted answered as well if he were to judge by the raised eyebrow. "So that our body heat will warm your bed, little mistress, without our skin having to be on it. Some humans find our touch to the cloth they sleep on to be undesirable," the male slave said. His voice was deep and he was of slight build, taller than the female at his side. He was at least clearly well fed, and the wrap around his body kept his eyes uncovered, though his mouth was concealed. Only one other part showed, and that was because the cloth around it was not as thickly wrapped. The cropped ears on them both, the way the fabric was wrapped around their skin was tight and practiced. It didn't take long for Zeshi to realize why the ears were visible. So everyone can see it for themselves. A faint shiver was concealed by the cloak she wore, but the memory of her own knife slicing into her ears was still the worst pain she'd felt in all her life, and seeing the proof of the practice lit a spark of disgust in her heart that would not die. All her other questions were forgotten. Though the pair were well fed, they kept their faces down so that their eyes never met even Layali's. "If there is nothing else, little mistress?" the elven male asked, and she mutely stepped aside. The pair went to each bed and simply lay themselves on each, arms and legs spread out, and they silently stared at nothing, pausing only to move the pillows aside. They looked at the ceiling without a word to each other on the guests who paid for the room. "Let's go out for a little while," Brain suggested, shifting with some discomfort on his feet. She glanced over at the two servants of the inn. They laid like corpses, utterly unmoving, dull and disinterested in all things. The living dead. She thought as more questions were silently answered, it made her think back to her own private resolve. "No child of mine will be so weak that they can ever have this done to them. They will be like me, strong. Strong is safe. Weak is." She saw Layali inch unconsciously closer to Brain as he reached for the door, and then she nodded, playing along. "Of course, dear, why don't we go have something to eat?" The faint noise of a rumbling belly from Brain's bed sent a twinge of pity through her when she saw that the slave did not move or speak at the little rumble, and then the trio was out the door and on the way out. "I told you," Layali said as she fell in a step ahead of her. "Nightmare. I didn't know about that stuff, but they're the lucky ones, I'll bet. They got a lot of the big, giant farms out here, the latifundias. If they're like the village farms, the slaves get drafty cabins shared together, and people like us, or humans, work as overseers." "They'd trust half-elves too?" She asked. "A slave is a slave. If it's half-human, they might offer a few benefits to help the overseers, a little extra food to sell out their mothers. Or maybe to save them. What do I know?" Layali shrugged, but contempt dripped from her every whispered word. She nodded along. "Their mothers, huh? Sure, of course. By the dead six, how could I have ever been this stupid?" she asked herself as they emerged out into the street. "I don't much like passing through the theocracy," Brain admitted. "It's just got this miasma of—" he rubbed his scruffy and presently unshaved chin. "I don't know, anger, maybe, to it. Like they're angry at the whole world and it's eating them up." She took that in and instinctively retorted, with so many non-humans ready to she cut off the statement. Her shoulders briefly slumped. She felt the piercing eyes of the little half-elf girl on her and recalled the empty socket that stared back at her the moment they met. "Do you blame them?" seemed inadequate now. She swallowed uncomfortably and pointed toward an establishment that had the savory smell of roasting meat with a small billowing pillar of smoke rising toward the sky. The establishment was clean of dirt on the outside and built of many stones, rather than the more common brick that was used in the modern age. A single arching door opened to the front and people dressed in fine clean clothes, men in black and white, suits more common in the South, and women in big, billowing dresses entered one by one, before which they were greeted by a well-dressed half-elf who bowed deeply to everyone before waving them in. "Smells good. Should we eat there?" She asked. "Sure, if you've got the coin for it." Brain snorted. "I don't have enough money for that place. But I can probably afford a place like that tomorrow if your heart's set on it. No, we'll have to go somewhere else, but you're not going to like it, Brain said, and then turned around and crouched down in front of Layali. He put his hands on her shoulders, and when she didn't flinch, but rather focused, he said, "Listen to me, I can bring you something back. The only ones in our room right now are elves. You'll be safe there," Brain explained, and the little half-elf frowned. "It's just food," she said. "I've seen animals slaughtered for food before. It's not like they're going to serve elf flesh." Her grim humor was followed with a snort. "Even this country wouldn't do that. It isn't the food that I'm thinking about. Just trust me, all right? Can you do that for me, just this once?" Brain asked, and she gave a tiny nod, then stepped away from his touch. He let her slip away from his hand. She then took 2 steps back, turned around, looked over her shoulder once, and rushed back to the inn. "So what's so unpleasant about the area around a place to eat?" She asked while Brain watched Layali depart. He watched the girl until she disappeared back inside the building, then turned around and started to walk. "You wanted to see more? Listen, we're only staying tonight." He rubbed the back of his head. "I just don't like it here. I'll get some work tonight, and we'll leave tomorrow. In a little while you'll see why. Just keep your head cool." She kept one eye on him as they strode the streets. "It's probably still going on," he muttered. "This is a big city after all, and the war with the Elf Kingdom is going better." This one was a battle captive taken by the Holocaust scripture themselves. The voice rang out around the corner, and a male voice shouted in pain. "He hasn't been sent to the breakers yet. Scum. Filth." The male voice shouted from out of sight. The sound of a crack, and a male scream followed. The mumbling of the crowd was audible after that. "What the?" Zesh's question hung when she followed Brain around the corner and saw the auction block on which an elven male stood, battle-scarred and with defiant eyes. He was one of the bigger sorts that made up a fair number of the elven population and which Zesh had occasionally seen brief glimpses of. "This way," Brain said, and took her arm at the bicep. He gave her a slight tug when she stood stock still, and when she looked in his direction he pointed to a ramshackle booth with dried strips of meat hanging from hooks and swaying in the breeze. "A public auction. Ikre doesn't do a lot of these. Most of the slaves in this city are public workers, but they do sell some to private companies who run the latifundias or the mines farther away." Brain said it in the quietest voice he could as the bidding went on. "The king, it is a big one, and he's not broken. The city won't take him, so he's probably bound for the mines. If they can reach the reserve price, which they will," Brain pointed out. She uncharacteristically allowed herself to be lightly guided away, though she kept her head almost swiveled entirely backwards to watch while she listened to what Brain had to say. "These spots are big entertainment for the lower classes, so we can get cheap food here, but I'd rather be gone before he's sold." Brain made his whisper rough and swift as he reached a booth. "Family strip. With cheese," Brain said as soon as he was in front of a spindly, unshaven and unwashed man with a gap-toothed smile and a hunched back. "What's aim at her, eh? She never see a sale before?" he asked Brain while watching the ways as she held still, transfixed. 5 silvers medium. 5 silvers large. 1 small gold. The bidding went on. "No, she never has," Brain explained. "Sheltered upbringing, you know. Her father was very protective of her, I guess," Brain said with a shrug. She tensed. Well, you have a good one. The oars'll go up tomorrow if you want a real good show." It was an ugly laugh, and Brain answered with a fragile little sly grin, though he snatched the meat and cheese away a little harder than was quite neighborly. "Sold." "Zeshi. Let's go," Brain said, and gave her arm a little tug. She was rooted to the spot. "You call that one a king it? What's that? He looks like an ordinary elf? Just bigger than usual." The elf began to struggle on the stage. Some members of the crowd got up and began to leave, faint queasy looks appearing on their faces as she watched them wander away. "No. You can't. You bastards. You motherfuckers." The elf shouted as 2 more humans of considerable size put their feet behind his knees and forced him down. "King it, it's a common word. It means kings get." "Don't you know who he looks like?" Brain asked. His hand held her bicep a little tighter. "No. Why?" She asked, her mouth open. Her heart began to race when she saw the auctioneer approach with the knife. "You've never seen a painting of the Elf King?" Kings get, kingets, are his sons and daughters, or at least the ones who look most like him. No other elf produces sons like that, Brain whispered. So. Wait. Kinget, kings get, his sons. So he's the elf king's son? Zeshi gasped. My half-brother? Zeshi realized as the male elf on the high wooden platform howled as his ears were quickly tugged taut. They wiggled as if to carry him away like wings, but nimble practiced human fingers closed on the tips, and with a few quick saws, the flesh was cut away and half of each ear discarded. The male howled loud and long enough that it was as if he was intent on dying by tearing out his own throat with a cry of pain, his eyes twisted and seeking help that wasn't there. My brother. I have a brother. Sisters, lots of them. The king, of course he does it often. How did I never see this? Zeshi gasped. Brain was tugging gently on her bicep, whispering something to her, but she heard none of it. The world that opened up beneath her feet before into an endless dark, now burst into flame inside her mind. Quick step, flash step, greater agility, boost, wind speed. Zeshi muttered martial arts that Brain had never heard, and then for a moment he was by himself. Zeshi's sleeve was torn off in his hand. His eyes snapped to the stage. She's going to get caught? He thought in a moment of panic. His pulse pounded for just a moment. On stage he saw the briefest of a blur. The humans who had already begun to slap manacles on the elf male, exploded in a spray of blood and innards, heads tumbling down into the streets below, and the elf himself was gone. The crowd barely had time to respond with a scream of surprise that became horror and fear as blood spilled over the grey stone and stained those nearest to the stage. The crowd fell over itself to flee with cries of alarm that spread far beyond the public square. They'll? What happened, Anayu? Where'd your wife go, eh? The stall merchant snapped out and leaned over the edge. All that blood, the foo. Damn it. Brain cursed. His sword was out and thrust into the merchant's mouth and out the back of his skull, then sheathed again an instant later. A look of surprise on the dirty, filthy face as he staggered back against the stone wall of the building behind him. He fell to a slumped position. The surprise never left his face, and trickles of blood began to run out of his mouth before Brain took 2 steps more. From somewhere else far away, as the crowd ran screaming in all directions, Brain heard the sound of cracking, breaking stone. The blue-haired swordsman took off running, screaming in horror. He killed the merchant. He's killing people. It's a rampage. A king! It awakened. Brain screamed, and watched the panic spread as the armored guards of Ikari City began pouring out of their gatehouses well out of view, and patrolling city guardsmen began to take up positions with practiced skill meant to stop advancing soldiers, and instead putting their skills to use stopping a riot. Brain worked around that easily enough. He rushed into a nearby alley and hopped from one wall to the next until he was on the roof, his feet pounding over stone and wooden rooftops alike until he was clear of the riot entirely. And then he simply hopped down into another alley and emerged into the city street. He caught sight of a stooped old man with a cane, one hand folded against the small of his back, and a scraggly unkempt beard of snow white on his face. "What's going on?" he asked the old man, who stared at the distant noise of the widespread panic. "I dunno. Something about a slave uprising or something? Probably nothing. One goes mad and people do dumb stuff. Nothing to worry about, young man." The old man gave Brain a toothless smile and began to hobble away. The light tapping of the old man's walking stick made noise like the steady clicking of a mechanical clock, and with that relief, Brain made for his inn with steady and reassured steps of his own. "I wonder if she's coming back?" Brain mused, and to his surprise, he found himself hoping that she did. Volume 7 C40. The Elf King? Why? Ainz asked the question and cursed himself immediately. So much for appearing all-knowing. He at least confined his self-derision to rolling his eyes mentally instead of physically. "Allfather," Raymond said, and a deep purple rage came over his face. "The Elf King is obsessed with one thing and only one thing. Rape," Nia hissed with loathing. "It's all he does. You could burn his kingdom down around him, and he wouldn't even stop thrusting into his latest victim." Raymond shot the Queen of Frost a surprised look that briefly overrode his anger. "I grew up in the Holy Kingdom, Cardinal. We're as devout as the rest of you." He was an example of why demi-humans needed to be put down. "We heard about him at least a few times in various sermons and in training," Nia answered with an angry lashing of her tail. "You're not wrong," Raymond said evenly after a nod from the Holy Queen confirmed the truth of the Dragonid monarch's claim. "But not wholly right either. He wants strong children. That's why he does it. He's obsessed with creating strong children with which to rule the world. So far, most of them were failures. Most? Albedo asked pointedly. Raymond kept himself relaxed while cursing his loose tongue. Yes, a few champions in the past appeared among his children. Nothing compared to the more powerful human champions, but still, he tries, Raymond said without missing a beat. My guess is that he heard about this tournament in our winter, learned about the Draconic Queen, and used the opportunity to murder her guards and snatch her up. She is a descendant of a dragon lord after all. It's possible he might be hoping she'll succeed where other women are. Failed. He finished with an awkward silence that spread over the room like spilled milk over a table. Then she'll be in the Elf Kingdom? Henry asked, a light shiver in her voice as she contemplated the fate of her sister monarch. Whatever is left of her. Albedo guessed, only for Cardinal Raymond to shake his head. It might not be all bad for her. The Elf King is lazy, sloppy, and frankly an utter moron. He thinks of nothing but his wants from one moment to the next. He never plans ahead further than his next rut. Raymond pointed out, the Draconic Queen isn't her grandfather, but she has the power to shift her being to the body of a small child. If Queen Draudillan is an exceptionally quick thinker, she might be able to disguise herself. Female or not, if she is too young to bear children, the Elf King will just treat her as a servant until she's old enough in his eyes. Then we must investigate the Elf Kingdom and find out where she is as quickly as possible and demand her immediate return if she is there. Ainz made the statement with such offhanded casualness that he didn't notice for several seconds that he was being stared at by the entirety of the throne room's occupants, save for Albedo, who beamed at him with pride that glowed like holy light on her face. Do I have something on my face? Ainz asked and touched his cheek. Ah, no, but... You say that as if it's no trouble. It took our best agents weeks to simply scout the outskirts. The Elf Kingdom isn't as densely populated as any human kingdom, but it is a vast wilderness with several small cities, many towns and villages, and the great city of Crescent Lake. How do you plan on your agents slipping in, and what will you do if she is there and he refuses to hand Queen Draudillan over? Raymond felt his heart racing in his breast as the bright eyes of the Allfather seemed to look into his very soul. My magic is supreme. I have means of scrying beyond the 10th tier, and agents that, if the elves had things to match, would have never allowed your best operatives to get a toe beyond the border. As you say, it will take time, but it can be done and it will be done. Ainz answered. He thought back to the endless hours staying up late at night, watching Queen Draudillan struggle over the bottle of alcohol, focus on her work for just a little bit longer. The way her face masked all her pain before she went to be turned down again in a plea for help. Her brave face when she ventured to see the soldiers on the front lines. She set the example I've tried to follow. I owe her a debt I can't repay or inform her of. If she is alive, I will put her back on that throne. Ainz vowed, but said aloud, and as to what I will do? I am not going to ask him to return her. I am going to inform him that she will be returned, and if he refuses, I will destroy him, Ainz said with a preternatural icy calm, and Raymond was forced to ask. Why would you go so far? You're talking about declaring war over a monarch to whom you owe nothing. Raymond asked while his mind whirled. Is he a god? A saint? Is that why the places he touches with his rule are beyond the impossible in their peacefulness? Ainz closed his eyes and took a deep breath, shaking his head while he rubbed the skin just above his eyebrows. I am the Allfather. Father to all. Not to one, not to a few, not to one or two. I am father to all. The Queen of the Draconic Kingdom is a worthy monarch, and she will make a worthy vassal. All who submit to my rule, as she was negotiating to do, are entitled to be protected as if they were my son or Aelian himself. Good save, Ainz. He told himself when he was sure he got his facial muscles under control again. He's a god. That was like listening to some divine pronouncement. I should have seen it when he went out of his way to avoid bloodshed against the Baharuth Empire. Or when he enticed them with the idea of a tournament to avoid war and save lives. I'm in the presence of humanity's divine protector. And yet... Raymond cast his eyes toward the non-human wife of the Allfather. She wore on her face the serenity of a joyful and proud expectant mother, while near to her stood a dragonid, a former defender of humanity who still had humans which she defended. As he stood there, taking it all in, the monarchs in front of him seemingly forgot his presence as they began to offer to render aid in support of the Allfather's wishes. I have flyers who can glide well over the Elf Kingdom's lands, higher than their bows can shoot. I can lend them to the effort if you like." Queen of Frost, Nyabaraha offered. Raymond's head began to hurt and he put a palm to his forehead. "Husband, we have some elven scouts still living in our lands who are loyal. They could easily slip over the border." Holy Queen Kalka suggested. "Goblins aren't human, so they should be able to enter comfortably. I can lend my assassins and spies to the effort." Wolf Queen Henry made the offer as her body shivered a little from a lack of the same control that more experienced monarchs had over their physical responses. "It can't be." Raymond tried to deny what he was hearing, but that did nothing to stop them from speaking, nor himself from hearing what he tried to deny. I can grant you temporary letters of visitation, to let you pass through our borders for official business. Let it not be said that the slain theocracy did nothing when a sister state was in danger." Raymond offered, and that briefly stilled the reality-warping conversation that was plaguing his mind before his very ears. "Thank you for your contribution, Cardinal. Have copies brought to us immediately and send word to your people to permit our agents crossing without an inconvenience," the Wolf King said, and then added with a raised finger, "in triplicate, with your personal seal." "Paranoid?" Raymond asked with a sardonic tone. "Cautious," Nfur replied succinctly. "It'll be done," Raymond said as the meeting finally drew to a close. Volume 7 C41. Queen Draudilin wiped the sweat from her brow as she hauled yet more buckets into the harem tent. Thankfully the Elf King seemed to listen to her at least a little when she said, "If you don't spare them at least a little rest, they'll die before they can bear you anything." That paused his constant mounting of her maids, and now the Queen was forced to struggle to tune out the sound of a weeping elf woman and the sound of flesh against flesh on the other side of the thin fabric. No wonder they suggested coming for my people. Theirs were suffering too. It was hard to hate them like she had. She grunted as she trod the final steps and set the buckets down, dropping the wooden pole from off of her shoulders and crouching down beside the brown-haired young woman. "It'll be okay. It'll be okay, everything will be fine," the Queen whispered in her childish voice as she leaned over the young maid and began to apply the herb-soaked waters to the cuts and bruises and other marks of cruelty. The Queen's hand no longer trembled, and she no longer doubted that she was lying to the servants she was now bound to serve. "Can they even hear my lies anymore?" the Queen wondered. The sound in the next tent was registering less at least. The other traveling elven women registered it not at all. "Here, let me help." A feminine voice reached Draudilin from over her shoulder. She looked behind her, one of the elven concubines, and one visibly pregnant, albeit not by much. "Can you?" Draudilin asked and looked her up and down. The woman nodded, her ears twitched. "He hasn't touched me since I conceived. It's the only time he stops except to switch. I have strength enough, and you bring us water enough every day to use on ourselves instead of just your people. It's the least I can do for you, child." Draudilin hesitated. "They're my responsibility," she whispered and stroked the cheek of the woman who lay limp on her back, staring at nothing. The woman's head tipped to fall on her cheek. "You're too young to bear it alone. Let me help. I promise I won't hurt them. I'm not a monster, and we have more experience with this than you do," the woman urged, and Draudilin finally gave a quiet nod. Just be careful with them," Draudilin urged, and without another word the elf woman began to assist, holding up arm by arm, leg by leg, helping to move the maids and court ladies and assisting in their care. Draudilin cradled one in her lap minutes later and tilted a cup of herbal water against the woman's swollen split lips. "Move your finger up and down the outside of their throat to help force them to swallow," the elf woman said, and then as Draudilin looked at her, dumbly, the concubine put 2 fingers beneath the woman's jaw and began to gently rub her fingers up and down from the start of chest and back up again. "This way they won't die of dehydration or starvation. You can feed and water them more until their minds recover. Trust me, I know," the woman added, and Draudilin nodded. Thank you," she added, and as she began to lay the broken woman back down on her mat, Draudilin's heart leapt into her throat. As she was laying the woman's arm down, she felt the hand squeeze hers. It was weak, barely there. A toddler could have shown more strength, but the slight pressure of flesh against flesh was present. The Queen of the Draconic Kingdom took her eyes directly to the wounded woman, and there was, however small, the spark of life and light to be had in the soft brown pupils. More? Thirsty. Who hungry? Please. Nightmare? Dream? The words were hesitant, confused, lost, but the wishes were clear enough. It's a nightmare. Just keep your eyes closed and wait, and it'll be over before you know it. Dylan promised. Just don't think, don't open your eyes, and wait for this all to end. Let me do everything. The woman let out a faint smile as she was about to speak, and Queen Dylan rushed her fingers to the woman's lips. Hush, just rest. All nightmares end, it's going to be all right. The queen choked out the words and swallowed hard. A lump made of tears went back down as she tried to suppress anything that might give away her lie. Let me get you food. I have some water here, but I'll get you something more to eat. It isn't much, but it will fill you up. Just stay there. The queen got to her feet as the maid closed her eyes. The pot full of boiled mealed oats was bland and flavorless on its own, however the elves who prepared it had taken to adding scouted fruits and honeycomb to the mix to add flavor. Paired with dry bread that would soak up the moisture, it wasn't bad. Dylan ladled a bowl and scurried back to her patient, almost sliding to her knees in her haste. She dunked the dry elven bread into the grayish white and yellow stuff and stirred it around. Here. I got food. Let us help you. The queen said, suddenly noticing the tension in the tent, and instantly knew why. The sound of the elf king's rutting ceased. The elf assisting her got up, moved behind the human, and after hooking her arms under the maid's armpits, she hauled her up to a seated position resting against the concubine's body. The maid stirred a little. She tried to move her arms and legs, and they only twitched. My arms. My legs? The maid whimpered. The concubine spoke up. The king is a monk. If you fought him, this was his punishment to you. You will regain control over them in time, but how long, we can't say. It is different for everyone. Just let your lady take care of you. Dylan held the bread out when the maid's jaw dropped open. The queen placed a small bite on her tongue. The maid was weeping a little as she tried to chew, and while she did, the queen poured water splashing into a little wooden cup. Here. Drink. Drink it down, it's good for you. The healers will come by to cast spells, but if they run out of mana it will take too long. This will dull the pain. Dylan promised, and when the woman swallowed, the queen held the cup to the split lips and slowly tilted it up. The maid began to cough and her chest spasmed, her lips twisted and she sucked them in over her teeth to try to stop her hacking. Be bitter. The maid said after the coughing fit had passed. I know. It's easier to bear if you're not aware when drinking it, but it is necessary. The concubine said with sympathy, you get used to it. If we get to our winter in the next day or two, maybe my husband can get us some things to make it more bearable, but for now, just drink it slow. I want to wake up. Oh gods. I want to wake up. The maid began to weep as memories came flooding back. Me too. Queen Dylan said in her tiny, childish voice. Me too. Volume 7 C42. At least the big oaf stopped flailing. She thought when she finally began to slow her pace. Behind her the city became smaller, though hardly a dot. No pursuit was either likely yet, or likely to find them even if they'd begun. And none of them saw me, I'm sure of that. The half-elf stopped and dropped the behemoth of an elf from off of her shoulder, and to her relief he didn't try to run or fight. His resistance to her taking him up to carry died as soon as they were outside the city walls. He landed and touched his ears. Blood dripped from them still. The veins and nerves that made them so sensitive had done nothing to stop either the flow of blood or pain to her half-sibling, as his shaking hands testified when he ran the fingers back and forth over their newly cropped shape. They really took them. So it's not just a rumor. Those monsters. He grunted and gasped, but suppressed his dismay and his pain when she said nothing, and looked down at her at last. Who are you? How many of you are there? She demanded and crossed her arms in front of her slight chest. What? He stared dumbly from his almond eyes, whatever answer he was looking for, a question phrased as a demand wasn't it? You. How many? Kingites. Sons and daughters of the Elf King? She clarified her question, and the sheer absurdity of the question gave him further pause. Lots. Like 1 in 8 of the population, supposedly. I don't really know, nobody does, but a lot. The behemoth answered, and she felt her knees grow weak. My brothers and sisters then. Do they all end up how you did back there, when they're captured,
that is?
She asked, but dread roiled in her heart like oil spreading out over a fire. Yeah, I guess. Talked to some of the others, but the theocracy, they got a lot of us now. I passed through a bunch of cities on my way here, can't go that long without seeing one of us, brothels, fields, mines, houses and such.
Why?
Who are you in?
And what was all that? Why'd you save me?
He demanded and crossed his own arms, a trail of crimson trickling over the length of his arm before a single drop fell into the green of the grass at their feet. I'm your half-sister. And a citizen.
No. A weapon of this country.
Or?
I was. She explained.
So this is what they've kept from me. Brothels.
Mines.
Fields. Menials of all kinds. They've been lying to me for 100 damn years. Even sheltered as she was, she was not unaware that some people preyed on the powerless. That instructor who raped Clementine was like that. Strange how I was the only one to believe her. No wonder she ran off, but she was crazy before that anyway.
But if that had happened in the black, where else?
Raymond.
You have some serious explaining to do when we meet again.
She shook her head to remove herself from her stupor. Listen to me, she said when she looked up at the brute. North of here is the kingdom of Carney. If you can make it there, you'll be safe. Which way is north? Her big brother asked and looked around.
No idea. But,
she answered, then thought it over. Brain, my traveling companion, he knows where it is, and we've been traveling steadily in that direction. She looked around and then leveled her arm out and pointed toward the distant horizon, tracing her finger from the city and toward another big bend in the far river.
So, you're my little sister.
Half-sister.
One of so many.
Thank you. He answered and touched his bloody ear again.
I'll see you,
I hope.
I'd better get going.
I suppose you're not coming with me?
He asked in a deep, regretful voice. No,
I need to get back to my companions. Nobody saw that it was me, so that shouldn't be a problem. All you have to do is keep moving. Good luck. She held out a small hand and it disappeared inside of the enormous grip of the towering, broad-shouldered elf, big brother. Same to you, little sister. Do you have a home somewhere that I could come see you at? He asked, a gentle smile over his smooth-lined face.
Yes,
She stopped.
No.
I don't have a home anymore.
I just realized that. I can't stay here anymore.
What the hell am I supposed to do?
She wondered about that with no clear answer.
I've got no friends now. No place of my own.
Just,
where the hell do I go? She asked, and the big elf put a hand down on her shoulder. You're strong, don't worry, the strong always find a place in this world, and if they can't, they've got the power to make one. I hope we meet again, and if we don't, I'll be forever grateful for my wandering little sister, he said and wiped the blood away from his arms. Then with that, he turned and took off at a dead run. She lingered to watch him go.
Shit, I didn't even ask his name.
She looked at the city again and it took her big brother out of her line of sight.
I need to go back.
Maybe I should have gone with my brother instead, but he knows this place at least as little as I do, and he's not going to go all the way to our winter. She thought it over, plus, I'm sure they're waiting for me. That brought an unexpected little smirk to Zesh's face that was entirely pure. Even without being together very long, Brain proved himself a pleasant and amiable, even charming companion who could brush off her brusqueness, while Layali was just damn cute when she doesn't have that deathly look on her face. The pathetic girl pulled at the faint heartstrings of Layali's fellow half-elf, and whether she wanted to admit it or not, she thought, I'd actually miss the girl a little. With that, she began to make her way back, though she took her time about it. When she did return, the city guard was doubled, with figures along the walls and in particular, at the hole in the wall which was steadily being repaired by various masons working by torchlight. Their backs were bent about their labors, notably, they were all human. The flames licked at the air, held up by multiple heavy-looking guards. They are clearly taking this seriously. Magic would make this easier, but they must be worried he'll come back and want to save mana for a fight. An understandable, practical, and needless response. The guards were equally useless. She used her martial arts again to boost her speed, and she was over the wall before they knew anyone was there. The grousing of workers having to labor into the night, slapping down stone after stone onto mortar to fix the holes she left for them, gradually retreated at her back as she advanced toward the inn. Nobody noticed one more pedestrian walking the street in the daytime, much less so in the darkness, as people either returned from work or were going out drinking. The noise of abundant carousing came from various establishments. The smell of food and beer was accompanied by the sound of laughter and bright yellow lights out of more than one building. Out of the most idle curiosity, the half-elf stopped at one as she passed it when she heard the noise of a stringed instrument and a fair and feminine voice ringing out with a drinking song. As she looked at the place, it didn't have glass windows, but it did have a broad bay window with heavy shutters that were held open to allow air to flow freely. She stood close to it and looked inside. Humans were gathered at various wooden tables, and a single song followed along with that of the woman who stood on a very low stage playing a tune. The beer she makes y'all so strong. But that don't help that big ole dong. So buy it time with a drinking song. She'll show you the way to go home. Hey. She'll show you the way to go home. Hey. But if it's not up, she'll leave you alone. Nay. It was high spirits inside, with mugs of frothy beer waving around as rough workers flirted with pretty young women. Gap-toothed smiles and big, lecherous grins that might have been off-putting anywhere else were their cause for people to relax more fully as they sought out whatever they truly wanted. So, comrades, she thought, and thought about her fellow Black Scripture members, can I really count those as comrades? We never did anything together. I'm literally the extra seat. The closest one to that outside of Raymond is Senna. The captain is usually quick to offer to let me go on one of his little outings. Now I am wondering where he actually goes every year. When the camaraderie of the various common humans in the big tavern, their raucous laughter and crude humor and general happiness was put right up in her face as it was through the window, she couldn't help but put a hand on the sill as if to leap over and join the crowd within. The brushing of the air against her ears beneath the hood was what stopped her. The ears twitched beneath her hood, and her hand tensed enough on the stone sill that her fingers gouged tracks in the grey stone. I have no comrades here, she thought, and turned her face away to return to the inn. When she reached her room and knocked on the door, there was no answer initially. She knocked again, still nothing. Finally she said, "Layali, it's me." And the rapid sound of small feet scampering over the floor sounded through the door. The lock turned, the door opened, and she slipped in before Layali pushed the door shut and locked it again. The half-elf trump card of humanity looked around the room as if Brain were hiding from her. "Where's Brain?" she asked as Layali yawned and went back over toward the bed. "He said he was going to get work." She stretched out and lay on the bed. The warmers were long since gone, and she snuggled beneath the blanket with her head on the pillow. "So this is what it's like to have one of my own. Never had it before. It's nice," Layli murmured. "What, a room?" she asked. "No. Never had a bed." She yawned again and began to fall back asleep. She pursed her lips while she watched the half-elf sleep, and thought of the relative opulence in which she was able to live when not minding the treasury. The difference between she and I? It's just power. That's it. The treasury guardian's fingers formed into fists as she began to wonder how those who treated her with respect would treat her if all her power was lost, or if she'd never had any at all. The answer was steadily running north still. I'd be like the rest of them. I am not one of the good ones. I'm a trump card, to be discarded when used and managed when not. She cursed and snarled until she saw the half-elf begin to quiver beneath the blanket as if she were disturbing her sleep. I'm going to find Brain, maybe earn some extra money with him, she said. Unsure if the girl heard her or not, she left the room behind.